Okay, so thanks everybody, and sorry for a bit the administration logistic issue. I'm the worst at this. It's kind of like it's a bit a challenge, but yeah, it's very nice to see a full room. Just gonna shortly gonna shortly introduce Claire, and then gonna leave the floor to her. So the idea today is to have so a presentation, but then as our seminar and talks to keep it quite informal, so that we can hopefully also discuss and get the insights of what's working and what's not working, and so on. So that's why we reserve 1.5 hours. We probably don't need that long, but just not to have time pressure and to indeed to keep it informal. About Claire. Claire research lies in the field of reduced order modeling, machine learning, and the combination of these technologies. She has worked in the applied modeling and computational group at the Imperial on a number of projects, including muffins, multi-phase flow-induced fluid flexible structure interaction in subsea application, and reliant risk evaluation, fast intelligent tool for COVID-19. Prior to this, Claire has held PDRA positions at Cardiff University, Durham University, and Plaxis, which is a Dutch company which produces geomechanical software. She has a PhD. Yeah, I think I have it. I've had to see so far, but that's PhD in something. I think. A while ago, I've forgotten. Yeah, and it was actually really nice to discover that we actually have common acknowledgement, and we know common people. So the person I'm currently working with is actually someone that Claire's known for many years. So that was it's quite nice to see that. So I'm very happy to have her here, and just gonna leave the floor to her.
Great, thanks very much, Maria. Well, yeah, it's really great to be here in Leeds on a bit of a flying visit. So yeah, I'm going to talk about machine learning, but machine learning within a framework of reduced order modeling. And this would fit quite well into what people sometimes call scientific machine learning. So that's using machine learning for sort of scientific modeling that we might do. So I'm going to talk mainly about one area of work I've done, and then I have got a couple of other things to say at the end, and I think I'm already going to skip over one of those items just because it might be a bit much in the time we've got, but we'll see how all that goes. So I've been doing this work with some master's students. Some of the work I might share at the end, Boyang Chen has had some input too. He also works at Imperial, and Christopher Payne as well has had a lot of input into this work, and he's sitting at the back today. He's got some meetings later on here. So let's have a look. Yeah, so as I was saying, mainly I'm going to talk today about the capabilities of reduced order models and how we can make them more useful than they already are. And then if there's time, I might talk about how you can combine space filling curves with convolutional autoencoders. And then I might also talk about how you can use AI techniques for high fidelity modeling, whatever that might be. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about reduced order models today. And they've been around in CFD for quite a long time, probably 20, 30 years. So there's quite a lot of theory behind reduced order modeling, but I'm going to focus on a subset of reduced order modeling, for which there's perhaps a bit less theory. And so this area is known as non-intrusive reduced order modeling. And there's been a lot of work done on this in the last 10 years. And that's partly because fairly early on, people discovered how that you can use machine learning in these. So suddenly in the last 5 years, the loads more papers have been written on this. So it's called non-intrusive reduced order modeling, but it's also called Galerkin-free reduced order modeling, can be called machine learning based reduced order modeling, data-driven reduced order models. That's a bit of a vague title. Equation-free models. So that should frighten everybody, because we don't want to say goodbye to the equations altogether. But yeah, so this is the type of reduced order modeling I'm going to talk about. And what reduced order modeling does is its aim is to approximate a high dimensional system. So you might have a computer code, you want high resolution, so you have lots of degrees of freedom, millions or billions of degrees of freedom. So you have this high dimensional system, but what you do is you find a low dimensional space that approximates the high dimensional system quite well. Then you can run your model quite quickly in low dimensional space. And if you've chosen a good low dimensional space, then you should be able to retain almost, well, perhaps not almost all of the accuracy of the original high fidelity model, but a large part of it. Now that sounds a little bit like magic, and there is a lot of work you have to put in to get these reduced order models to work. There are compromises in accuracy that you do make, and there are also compromises in generality. So if you've got a CFD code, you can set it up and you can run it for any problem. If you've got a reduced order model, then it's a reduced order model of a particular problem. So it won't solve any general problem in CFD. It's just focused on one particular problem, like flow past the cylinder. So how it manages to achieve this speed up is by splitting into an offline stage and an online stage. So the offline stage is where you do all your computationally expensive work. And so generally you run a CFD code or whatever it is you're interested in solving. You can run it for a certain length in time. You might want to run it for different parameters for certain lengths in time, but you build up a set of solutions called snapshots. And then what you do is you are going to throw away your computer code and your discretized equations, and you're going to base your reduced order model on the snapshots that you've got, so just on your solutions. So that's what restricts the applicability of your reduced order model. And then, so first of all, you need to find your low dimensional space. So you can apply dimensionality reduction techniques for that, such as singular value decomposition, or also known as proper orthogonal decomposition, with the slight extension of singular value decomposition. So these are sort of well-known techniques that just manage to distill all the information in a set of snapshots down to a number of basis functions that vary globally over the domain and don't have compact support. So you get a lot more information in your basis functions than you would finite element basis functions, but they are geared towards a certain problem. So once you've got these basis functions, you've found your low dimensional space, you can map your CFD snapshots to this low dimensional space, and then you could interpolate in some way to carry on predicting in time, or interpolate to predict for different parameters, different model parameters. And of course, that's what neural networks or machine learning techniques are good at, interpolating. So nowadays, most people for the interpolation stage will use neural networks. And so once you've trained your neural network, then your work in the offline stage is more or less done. And you can say, right, my neural network is going to be my online stage. That should be really fast to run. So I've got a really fast model. And you can predict in time or predict for unseen model parameters. So that's reduced order modeling in a nutshell. Now I'm going to talk today about flow past buildings. So on the screen now, you can see some blue rectangles, which are buildings. And the colour you can see represents the speed of the air. The air is going from left to right, and blue is 0 and red is the highest speed. So it's quite a simple, small domain with, I don't know, about 15 buildings in. So if we were to use the standard non-intrusive reduced order model approach, we would generate our snapshots that would look something like what you've got on the screen. We'd then put these in columns of the matrix and we'd apply singular value decomposition to it. Now, the issue with that is we can predict in time, but if you turned around and said to me, well, can we predict for different configurations of buildings? I'd have to say no, because my snapshots are all related to this domain here. So we can build a reduced order model, but it can only make predictions for flows past these particular buildings. So that's a bit restrictive. So what I'm going to do today is just show you two small changes that can be made to the sort of standard DDROM approach that can mean that you can apply, you can use your non-intrusive model to solve for different configurations of buildings. And you could also solve for a larger domain. So for the last 10 or 15 years, people have been gathering snapshots on domains like this, and then they're restricted to using that domain. So they have to use the same size domain, and they also have to have the same configuration. Now, there has been work on flow past bluff bodies. I think somebody used 3 or 8 parameters, I can't remember which, to describe a bluff body, and they got some quite good results for that. But we can't parameterize, say, 1,000 buildings in that same way if you need 8 parameters just to parameterize one body. So although that method's interesting, it's not really, it couldn't be used to model flow over a large part of the city, let's say, and that's maybe what we're interested in today. So just 2 steps that we're going to introduce: a subsampling step, and that's magically going to free the DDROM from its dependency on the domain. So that's key, really. And then domain decomposition, we're going to use that in the online stage. So this is the offline stage, the computationally intensive part of a standard non-intrusive reduced order model. So you generate solutions from your CFD code, your high fidelity model. So that's the really expensive bit. You apply dimensionality reduction. So that's just using something like proper orthogonal decomposition, also known as PCA, principal component analysis. Here, actually, we've chosen to use a convolutional autoencoder. Works in more or less the same way as POD or PCA as far as DDROM is concerned, but it finds a non-linear mapping, so it's more effective. So once we've then reduced the space, then it's time to learn the governing equations. So we teach our neural networks to learn how these snapshots evolve in time. And for this, we're using another neural network. We've called it here a predictive adversarial network. I'll give some more details about that later. So these are the standard steps if you've got a CFD code or something like that you can implement. Fairly easy to implement, I would say. Probably easier to develop this code than it is the original CFD code. And so it's at this stage that we introduce the subsampling. So instead of having a snapshot being the nodal solutions over your entire domain, we subsample onto subdomains that are a small part of the overall computational domain. So I've got a picture I'll show you about that later, but this subsampling turns out to be key, really, for freeing you from the restrictions of your original computational domain. So if we think about the online stage, what you want to do in order to run your model super quickly is you choose an initial condition. It might be different to the one you've run before. You would then, with your basis functions, map this to the low dimensional space. And then using your neural network, you just march forward in time. You give your neural network the previous time level, and it gives you the future time level at a sort of simple case. So the addition we make is we choose an initial condition for some domain, and we split our domain into these subdomains related to the subdomains that we've subsampled on. So they've got to be the same size. And then we can just obtain the reduced variables as we've done before. We march forward in time. However, we're solving for just the solution on one subdomain, and we then need to solve for every subdomain in the domain, and we have to iterate till we get global convergence. So now I'm going to show you, yeah, this is the subsampling. So we use this kind of, we call it star-shaped grid or a plus-shaped grid here. It's got 5 subdomains. And so instead of using all the nodal values that we would have this 2D image here, we just plot this grid randomly located in space and randomly orientated, and we interpolate the solutions onto these these set structured grids here. And we take that as one snapshot. And we want many snapshots. In fact, I think we used between 70 and 90,000 snapshots. So we'll place that grid on our solutions at some point in time up to 90,000 times to build up our training data. And you can perhaps start to imagine that what we're doing is, or what we're going to do is, we're thinking about the central subdomain, and we're going to have information from neighboring domains. And so what we're going to teach our neural network to do is make a prediction for the central subdomain, given information from its neighbors. And so you can see that we're now not so bound to the overall computational domain. We're just looking at small parts of this domain, different configurations of buildings. So now if we think about the online stage, if you imagine what we've got is a domain that's a different size with a different configuration of buildings, we have to split it up so we can fit an integer number of these grids into our domain. And then we've got boundary conditions. These boundary conditions tell us what the solution is in a layer of grids around the edge of this domain. And we're going to look at the solution in this green block here. So can we solve the solution there? And we'll have trained our neural network, given the solutions left, right, up, above, and below, it's going to be able to tell us a prediction for the solution in that green block. We then move the grids one step over. We do the same thing. We solve the green block, and we've now got an updated solution for the orange block to its left. And we've got estimations for the solution in the blocks, in the other blocks around it. And so we keep sweeping forward in space until we get global convergence, until the solutions we're predicting don't change very much. Is this slide particularly helpful? I don't know, maybe not. So alpha is what I'm calling here the pod coefficients, or as we've used an autoencoder, it's the latent variables associated with velocity field. And all this diagram does is to say, we give our predictive adversarial network this information on the left. So it's at a time level k. and grid G, and this is central, west, east, north, south. So we're giving it, for the central grid, the previous solution. For the neighbouring grids, we give it our best estimate of the future solution. And for the central grid, we have, then our neural network gives us its prediction for the central grid at the future time level. So basically, left is the input to the neural network, right is the output. So it's a mixture of information at different time levels. And that's why we choose to have a grid like this. And if you think about it, yeah, this is a little bit like finding out different stencils or in space. You know, we want information from the neighbours to inform what the solution is at a particular node. So yeah, this is the predictive adversarial network. So there is the input that I described on the previous slide, and these alphas, they're all the low-dimensional representation of velocities. I've also put in here this beta, and that's some low-dimensional representation of buildings, because it needs to know where the buildings are. So that's the input, and the output is the future solution at the central grid. And yeah, we use this predictive adversarial network. So this is based on a paper in 2015 by Makhzani. And they described an adversarial autoencoder. The autoencoder has, it's basically an identity map. So the output tries to replicate the input. So we've based it on that, but we've changed it here. So the output obviously is trying to be the same as the input. So it's just any sort of standard neural network. We again use convolutional layers for G, for H. You could use fully connected layers if you didn't have so much data, if your vectors, you know, or the size of your data wasn't so large. But attached to the central layer here is a discriminator. So this is a discriminator that you find in a GAN, a generative adversarial network. And this discriminator tries to force the this inner layer here to have a Gaussian distribution. And this is shown to work quite well, and it means hopefully that there aren't any gaps in the distribution of this hidden layer. Because if there are gaps, that sometimes means that your neural network is more likely to go off the rails when it predicts in time. It might suddenly diverge. If it's getting an input that it hasn't seen before in training, it doesn't quite know what to do with that. So it can diverge or tend to a steady state, which is not physical. And that's really what the adversarial layer tries to prevent. And it has managed to do that for this case, anyway. So, yeah.
One can impose it instead of learning. This community is trying to learn. Is trying to learn that, right? Why not impose it by having a layer impose?
Well, I suppose you could say that this layer does impose that through learning. But yeah, it doesn't have to be Gaussian. It could be uniform, or it could be any distribution that you feel. Traditionally, people use Gaussian most of all. Whether these hidden variables should satisfy a Gaussian distribution or not, I don't know, it's debatable. But yeah, we haven't tried looking at other types of distribution, but certainly uniform is also used by some people.
And maybe a step back, because I didn't completely understand. So why was there a need to install the discriminator? Why people need to?
So yeah, without the discriminator, this could just be a feed-forward neural network, may or may not have convolutional layers. And what can happen is you can train your model with your data, and it can work quite well. If you're then predicting in time, or just predicting for unseen data, then neural networks don't always predict that well. And it might start to see training data it might start to have an input that's sort of a little bit further away from the training data it's seen. And then it might give you an output that's even further away from the training data that it's seen, that you're then eventually going to be feeding in as an input. And so what can happen is, because then it's not seen this data before, it makes bad predictions, and this often leads to a steady state prediction or divergence. And this is often because the latent space isn't fully covered. You don't have a coverage, you have these gaps in your knowledge in this layer here. So you try and make that latent space as well covered as possible and as neat as possible with no holes in. So you can't suddenly end up in an area where you don't have much data and then your neural network won't know how to predict. So that's really the point of the discriminator. And you can read more about that in Matt Kazani's paper. He looks at this kind of problem for his adversarial neural network.
It's kind of the string of detachments where it's not possible to extrapolate. It's like the limit of extrapolation.
But yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, maybe a uniform distribution is safer because you have that within certain bounds. Okay, so yeah, here's just saying we train 3 neural networks, one for the velocity fields, one for the building fields, and this is to find the low dimensional space, and then one for how to predict in time. So good, I'm at the results now. So we ran some CFD simulations for a 6x6 domain and ran it for 500 time levels. So we subsampled onto grids that were 0.5 by 0.5. 95,000 grids we used to collect data. These grids were randomly orientated and located. And it so happened that we used 80% of the snapshots for training and 20% for validation here. We did this work with two master's students. So one focused on the convolutional autoencode and one focused on the predictive adversarial network, which is why then we've got the different percentage of snapshots here used for training. But I mean, we probably, well, it doesn't really make any difference, but you might expect to see the same percentage there. It's just a bit more logical. But it's just because we had 2 different students and they did different things. So for the predictive adversarial network, we subsampled onto 75,000 grids. Again, why we only took 75,000 here and 95,000 here. It's just because we had 2 students. So that's how we built up our training data. So we trained all the networks. And then we applied it to an unseen test case. So this is a 9x9 domain now. It's not 6x6. We generated a 9x9 domain. We've got a different configuration of buildings that the neural network hasn't seen. And we predict from the 50th time level to the 200th. So up to the 50th, you might expect some startup, which we just skipped. On initial condition, of course, we started from a high fidelity model solution. And we took our boundary conditions from the high fidelity model solution. In the future, we want to use a GAN that will generate realistic boundary conditions. Again, GANs that have a discriminator are known for generating realistic images that fool people. So they're also being used in CFD to try and generate realistic instances of fluid flow. So we've got this unseen configuration and this larger domain. And here are the results. So we've got the high fidelity model on the left, and we've got our NIRAM on the right. So it's 9x9, you can't see the buildings very well because they're quite small. But you can perhaps see that roughly the flows look like they're similar. There's less contrast in the one on the right. And we're going to zoom in now. And also plotted velocity vectors. So the CFD or high fidelity models on the left. You can see that it has a higher contrast from low to high than the non-intrusive reducer model manages to achieve. But it manages to find the same path through the buildings and gives a very realistic prediction. So yeah, we were quite happy with this. I think it's a good start. People haven't done anything like this before, predicting for sort of unseen configurations like this. So yeah, we're happy, but there's more work to be done. But I mean, first of all, the question is, but yeah, is it right? Is it right? What's going on? And it's quite hard to prove prove how well these models are doing, especially ultimately because we want to move away from having the high fidelity model. Now, how do we know whether it was right or not? So we plotted some probability distribution functions. So here's a picture of the domain, and on it is the finite element nodes that we used in CFD. We used an adaptive mesh to try and get the buildings nice and sharp. You can see 4 black points, and we sampled here time histories of the 2 velocity components. So you can see here a PDF of our U on the left and V on the right. So the DDROM is the orange, and the high fidelity model is the light blue outline. So the probability distribution functions agree more or less with one another. Here's another point. You can see that the non-intrusive reduced order model doesn't have the extreme values. It doesn't capture the extreme values, but it captures the range in between quite well. Here's the 3rd point, and here's the 4th point. So given the fact that these flows are highly turbulent, these are quite good results. So I'm going to conclude now. And yeah, just say that we feel that, you know, we've reached a stage of success being able to predict for unseen configurations. Yeah, we've predicted for a different building configuration, but also a larger domain, which people haven't done using nylon models before. Now, future work, as I said, we need to generate boundary conditions independently of the CFD code. We want to apply this to 3D. I can't think why it wouldn't work. We might run into difficulties because, of course, 3D, the inputs to the neural networks will be larger, the training process will be harder. But yeah, that's what would stand in the way of it working. But that would be it as far as we can see. And yeah, what would greatly sort of enhance the credibility of this work would be if we could include some kind of physics-informed element to it. So having got rid of the discretized equations, can we bring them back? And that's what physics-informed methods do. And they tend to train neural networks with a term in the loss function that, say, might ensure that mass is conserved. So it might penalize solutions if mass isn't conserved. And with physics-informed neural networks, you can also introduce conservation of momentum, if you want to, or other physical constraints. So that's really what we want to do next. So that will help the predictions, definitely. So I was going to go on to talk about how you combine space filling curves with autoencoders, which is really cool, but I'm not going to talk about that now. Yeah, and maybe I shouldn't also talk about how you can use, well, maybe I'll just say in a sentence or two. We've been working on another idea to use AI to help us with our CFD modeling. So a finite difference stencil is remarkably similar to a convolutional layer. In fact, it can be the same. So a convolutional layer, you take loads of data and you train your neural network and then you come up with a set of weights. Well, of course, finite difference schemes, we know what the stencil is, we know what the weights are. So there's no need, if you were to try to apply a finite difference stencil as a convolutional layer, you don't bother with the training. You know what the weights are because you can just use finite difference schemes. Or you could use finite element methods and work out what your equivalent weights would be, bung them in the neural network, and then just with one layer, you can have the input to that layer as the solution at one time level and the output, the solution is the next time layer. So suddenly you've got a CFD solver with no more approximation than is in your discretization method already. That is written as a convolutional layer. So it's as if you've got your finite difference discretization. You could code it in Fortran. You might use PETSC. You could code it in C++. You might use PETSC. You could code it in Fortran and maybe use Keras or TensorFlow. Sorry, Python, using Keras or TensorFlow. Yeah, sort of implementation details. So why would we want to do that? Because they're sort of building GPUs, and it's quite hard to run Fortran codes on GPUs. It can take a lot of effort to get old codes working on these new machines. They're building supercomputers now that are much more efficient than GPUs, actually, that take a fraction of the power that you need to run a cluster of GPUs. You can have a one computer. These are computers being developed by Cerebras and GraphCore. So actually it's going to use a lot less energy than you would on a GPU cluster. And also because we've got AI libraries that when you write machine learning code, there's not much difference as to whether you run it on CPU or GPU. And ultimately there won't be much difference for you, the developer, when you run on these new AI computers, because the libraries have done all the hard work for you. They've abstracted out all this detail about computer architecture. So this is one theme we're working on, and we're wanting to generate solutions of this domain you can see, which is of South Kensington. I think the big green area is the park, Hyde Park. And so, just skipping through this, we can get CFD solutions with lots of high resolution. So you can, this is at a height of 5 meters, see all the streets appearing amongst all this blue. And this is as we move higher and higher up. There are fewer buildings that are 15 meters. And there's a side profile. So we're working now on implementing CFD through convolutional neural networks, and we don't train them, which is one of the hardest parts about neural networks in a sense. So we don't train them, and we get these great results. So we're trying to apply this now to lots of different cases to see if we can use unstructured meshes with them as well. And yeah, that's enough of that. So I just thought I'd give you mention that briefly. So I'm very lucky to have been funded by some EPSLC projects, and these have funded other people who have helped contribute to this work. And yeah, there are some of the papers, and I'm happy to send those links in an email. So the main work I spoke about has been published, and there's a similar paper that instead of applying that main idea to flow around buildings, it applies it to flow in pipes. Thing I didn't talk about is published on arXiv, and we're preparing a paper on using these AI libraries to model CFD problems. Yeah, so there's quite a lot to take on board today. I'm sorry, and if you didn't know what reduced order modeling is, then there might have been a few steps that weren't at your fingertips, but anyway, hopefully you've been able to take something away from this. If there are any questions, I'll try my best to answer them.
I have a question. Anyone can hear me?
Looks like life is muted.
Okay, great. Sorry, Claire, that was really great. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Wait, Leif, we have another question here, and then we're gonna give the floor to you.
Okay, sorry.
I don't know if you can hear the question though. Otherwise, I'm gonna, or maybe Claire can repeat it.
I'll try and repeat
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so subsampling generates lots of example sets of boundary solutions. And that's really good. And then that's sort of it. Instead of running the model loads of times with different boundary conditions and lots of different building conditions, I can do the subsampling to sample that space without doing a model. Then what happens then if you network on a large domain with different boundaries? Right, yeah. I've got to try and remember that. Sorry, there's also possibly some misunderstanding.
Yeah, so it's a question about the subsampling. So first of all, yeah, where are we? Here we are. Yeah, so how do we do the subsampling? Is it that we use one solution in time and sample it many times with the grid? So actually, no, we do run the CFD model through time as we would normally, and we subsample for the compression, the low dimensionality stage. We just sample at random. So we choose a time level at random, and we choose an orientation and location, and we subsample, and then we again choose a different time level, probably, or it might be the same one. You never know. But we choose it randomly, and then we again orientate and locate the grid at random. So we're subsampling from many different times. Now, when it comes to the generating data for the prediction, we again sample the time levels at random, but we need two successive time levels. So we choose the time level at random, and then we subsample for that random time level and the next one as well. And we sample onto the star-shaped grid. Now, what we haven't been doing here is generating the boundary conditions. That's what we want to do. So we're sampling sort of anywhere in the grid, which gives us information about different building configurations, if you like. And we will go to the edges of the domain. But what I was saying was future work when it comes to making predictions for a grid like this. We want to also be able to randomly generate the boundary conditions around the edge. So at the moment, we're relying on the high fidelity model to give us the boundary conditions around the edge, which is a bit of a cheat for reduced order modeling. I mean, it's just a step on the way, but we can't be reliant on the CFD model because there comes a point when we're not going to run it for really large cases.
We say that you were predicting the next box from the 4 surrounding boxes and the previous time step in the middle. So it kind of gives you, so that's like an example set of boundary conditions.
Yeah, sorry. So you could think of the grids you're looking at here. The orange ones are acting like boundary conditions for your green grid. Yeah. Right, sorry. Yeah, certainly. I mean, we haven't experimented with it actually, just because we haven't got time. But you're right. Yeah, I see what you mean now. Sorry, I misunderstood that point. But yeah, we could do that because we've got solutions in subdomains anyway. For the pipe flow that I mentioned at the end, we also did this for flow in a really long thin pipe. We use the 10-meter domain to make predictions for a 1 kilometer long pipe. And there we were playing around with the boundary conditions a bit more. And we were, probably doing what you suggested, actually, more or less. It's slightly easier to model a long thin pipe than it is this 2D configuration. But that's certainly something we're going to look at. Got lots of options. But as you say, it's promising from what we've seen. Thanks. So maybe we'll go to the question online now. Do you think?
Yeah, yes.
So who was it who had a?
I think Clive had a question.
I had a question. Sorry, I'm not there in person, Claire. This was really exciting. Can you hear me all right? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, really cool stuff. So I have sort of two questions. One of them is sort of generally about this sampling idea. The way you describe it, to me, it almost feels like a really coarse convolution. It's like a really, like you sort of picked a scale of this sampling, and now to say, okay, this is probably the sort of distance at which I need to have information to make a prediction in the next time step. Whether you've sort of thought about the size of this thing and how that might affect the predictability of the network. And then another sort of similar thing, the bit that I was really excited about, the way you use the previous and the next time step there, it reminds me of some work I've looked at where they're doing self-supervised denoising, where you're trying to predict a pixel in the true value of a pixel, and you only give the surroundings to be able to predict that denoised pixel. In that work, they just use a convolutional layer, and it's just loads of convolutions all the way down. And I think that means they can extract information on different scales. So that's to say, maybe that paper could be an inspiration for how to do this sort of stencil that you're doing, but in a way that picks information on different layers. I was just wondering what you thought about, the size of that, and then that comment.
Yeah. Well, the second comment is really interesting, actually. Yeah, and it does. That could be really useful. I shall go away and read about that more.
I'll send you in. I'll send you.
Cheers. That would be great. Thanks. But yeah, as for the size of the grid, so the grid you can see here, this was just for schematic purposes. It's a 50 by 50 grid that we use. And this domain is actually a 3 by 3 domain, and we actually used 6 by 6 to train on. So it will be 6 by 6 domain. The grids are 0.5 by 0.5, and they have 50 grids within 50 grid points within each grid. We did experiment a little bit with different resolution within the grid and different sizes of grid. But actually, we didn't experiment too much with that. This turned out to be the best for our purposes, but we didn't experiment too thoroughly with that, partly because it's quite a thing to then train a convolutional autoencoder, because you've got lots of hyperparameters associated with that. And in a sense, these are two more hyperparameters, your grid spacing and your grid size. So this turned out to be reasonable in this case, but you're right. Certainly, if we want more of the fine scale detail, you need to make sure you've got a very fine grid. And this size, we wanted to make sure that we were capturing a couple of buildings in each grid to try and, to get a picture of the flow coming through the buildings. That was our aim. Intuitively, that's what we thought we should aim for.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing is, looking in your paper, you used the max pool layers in the sort of in the coarsening, and in my mind that removes spatial information in that, over the max pool sort of reach, you don't know exactly which pixel informed the value. It's just over the whole range. So there's a paper that they have something called shift invariant convolutions, where you apply effectively a form of blurring, so that you, in a uniform way, extract that information out, and they show a lot more stability in class prediction. So imagine moving a cat or a dog slightly. the actual feature you get out, the stability is much better than if you just use max pooling. So that could be another. They're also called anti-aliased convolutions. Anyway, that might also help.
Yeah, that's.
But I mean, this is a great data set to. That was going to be my last question. Whether you're considering sharing some of this data in a way, because I think this could be a really great benchmark data set for developing some of these techniques, right? And especially the way you've separated into the reconstruction, autoencoded part and the predictive part. You know, future research could go down both of those. So I don't know if you thought about that, but I'd love to make a project and work on this data. So.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we'd certainly be happy to share the data. Yeah, that won't be a problem. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and yeah, thanks for the comment about the shift invariant convolutional methods. Yeah, because certainly that's what you're after in a convolutional method, really. That's what you're trying to capture. So we have used, what is it, striding as well to in other projects to try and get better results with the convolutional networks. But yeah, here we did use max pooling. It could probably benefit from that improvement that you're suggesting.
Yeah, and it's very, the guy who made these shift invariant ones, they're all they're easy changes to the sort of standard resonant structures and stuff like that. So I've definitely seen benefit using them. But yeah, I've just popped the reference there in the chat, but I'll send it to you as well. But thanks again. It was really really cool.
Thanks. Well, sorry you're going to miss out on all the cakes. Anyway,
it's all right. I'm just so happy this thing is is all blooming. I mean, it's nice to hear there's a full room and a really good talk. So
great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Enjoy the cake, everyone.
Is it that amount now? I have a small question about
just I see that what this model is really fast. How much computing time required? Especially
yeah, so I'll just repeat the question. But yeah, so the question is about the computational time and the time it takes to train these networks. So yeah, I actually I can't remember how long it took to train these networks, but you're certainly looking at 8 hours, I think, 8 hours plus. I seem to remember the students not being too happy about that and having to get Colab Plus licenses or train on the HPC because they couldn't do it on their laptops. So yeah, training time, it is significant. That's what you expect with reduced order models, especially machine learning based reduced order models. It's the offline stage that's really heavily computationally intensive. Now for 3D networks, we have actually managed to come up with a 3D model. Yeah, and we did train it. And it was just about feasible. So that's probably about a day's worth training. Again, I don't know any of the times off the top of my head, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, when you move to 3D, it is a larger overhead. But perhaps if we use better convolutional layers, we might have to do less training for. But there are certain methods you can use as well. Sort of perhaps you may, if you're using 3D data, you might have to start training on the fly, and using some data to train with, then deleting that data and bringing in new data, perhaps sort of alternating training sets. But yeah, it's something we're going to have to deal with in the future. Thanks.
Yeah, I have two questions. One was about the so the prediction that seems to go, so it's not as accurate in the streams, and it's quite how do you think about solving that problem? And then the other question is about the idea of the convolutional layers as stencils. And so if you have so does it work that for each equation you would have a different stencil and then you combine based on the, if you have multiple coupled equations, you have multiple layers. So
Yes.
how many layers they can have? What does each layer corresponds to?
Yeah, you could certainly build up the layers like that. But basically, if you've got your stencils, then however you sort of combine them in Fortran, you want to do an equivalent thing in your neural network. And in some of the work, we've used more than one layer. And if you've got nonlinear problems, you might want to use special multiplication functions in the neural network codes. I mean, Chris, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, basically it's exactly as you think, just sort of built up sort of image representing this previous velocities. But a lot of the problems we're interested in is solutions of, for example, that very parts of the South Kensington area under the fair showed. That's a big problem. You have to spread the information in one time step right across the map. You've got decomposition flow. So the way that we do that, we basically use an autoencoder essentially as a multi-group method to solve system equations and to get that information across, right across. So we basically use a sort of multi-group method, which is effectively the same as the UNet. It has exactly the same architecture as the UNet, which is the standard network. So that's how you get it.
And so then, at the last level, you have to have this stencil where you enforce the equation.
Yeah, you send the residuals effectively across the different layers. Bits basically effectively in that problem. Do you have the animation show?
Of the final solution?
Yeah.
On my laptop.
In that problem, you yeah, so you send the residual, number of grids, just like you would in standard order. So it's really problem. That's level of course meaning.
No.
That's level of course meaning is 2 by 2 by 2, and so on until you get one cell that propagates the information right across the. I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
I think I'm getting that.
Yeah. One thing that's worth mentioning is that that the unit is great. New architecture, really good for imaging and stuff. But you can use that analogy with multiple methods to come up with new architectures for imaging. And that's exactly what we might persuade various people to try these new architectures that they're beyond yet. Or that are kind of analogous to much more sophisticated multiple methods than sort of standard sort of.
I think I'd say that these methods are a lot about yeah, you can't avoid the fact that you'll have to do a lot of computational work at some point if you want high resolution results. So for the reduced order models, you end up doing loads of work in what you call an offline stage, which then doesn't count because you know you're going to do loads of work. And you come up with a really fast model that you can use as an operational model in your online stage. For these AI models, where we're using these convolutional layers to mimic finite difference stencils or finite element stencils, the work is done by, well, the AI library in working out how to run on GPUs or CPUs or the AI computers. But it's also been now done in that we say what the stencils are and we give that information to the machine. So the machine doesn't have to learn, the machine is told what the stencils are. So we're moving around where the work is done in a way, just shuffling it around, doing it in different places to best suit the tools that we've got, which we're deciding now it's going to be GPUs and AI computers.
Basically, is the quickest way being able to run our CFD models, particularly on like Cerebus computer. Cerebus have just released a 12% AI chip. It's massive, it's square, but it's got a million cores on it. Really like to do is build them up, CFD models. Currently, the models we run on pretty modest computational resources, so it's fairly cheap GPU basically. But you can imagine what you could do if you were able to run on one of the Cerebus, for example, or large clusters of GPUs. And it's relatively easy to do that with the software available in AI. It's not AI like it's not trivial. So but you don't have to write massive codes like you do with CFD models. So I mean, the model that we just showed you, information.
No,
This model is only 100 lines of code. So.
Yeah, just 100 lines of code, whereas the in-house finite element codes we've got are enormous. Yeah. I wonder now if people haven't deserved some sugar. Loads of sugar.
Okay, thanks for coming, guys. The online people. Thanks, Leif.
Thanks again, Maria. It's great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good lines of code, give the same result.
Yeah.